Gotham City had always belonged to its monsters. This was not metaphor. It was municipal fact, written in the blood of every mayor who tried to clean the streets, every commissioner who lasted long enough to grow a conscience, every idealist who arrived by bus with ambitions and left by ambulance with regrets. Gotham was not a city that reformed. It was a city that consumed, that took the righteous and the wicked alike and ground them down into something darker, a something more honest about what human beings were capable of when the lights went out and the rain came in sideways off the bay. But even monsters had hierarchies. Even the darkness had architecture. For generations, that architecture had been maintained, quietly and visibly, with the precision of a scalpel rather than the chaos of a bludgeon, by the League of Assassins. Ra's al Ghul had not merely observed Gotham's criminal ecosystem, he had cultivated it. Well, he had pruned it when it grew too wild, watered it when it withered, and harvested it when the time was right. The Falcones, the Maronis, the Penguins Operation, Black Mass Syndicate, all of them believed they ran their corners of the city. Ra's had always known better. They were tenants. He was the landlord who never showed his face, who collected rent in favors and information and the occasional strategic elimination. He had held this arrangement for 147 years. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was not delivered by courier or dropped through a mail slot. It appeared on the desk of Ra's al Ghul's Gotham safe house, a brownstone in the Tri-Corner district that officially belonged to a Maltese shipping company that officially did not exist. Between the hours of midnight and 2 in the morning, despite the fact that 4 of the League's finest had been stationed at every entrance. The 4 men were found at dawn, not dead, but stripped of their weapons and seated in chairs with their wrists zip-tied behind them, alive and furious and deeply, professionally humiliated. The letter bore no signature, only a gold-embossed image of a round table. The high table acknowledges Ra's al Ghul's historical stewardship of the Gotham territory. The table further acknowledges that this stewardship has, on balance, served the interests of order. However, as of the 1st of next month, when all criminal operations within Gotham City limits and the surrounding Tri-County area will fall under table jurisdiction. Existing infrastructure may be absorbed at the table's discretion. Personnel may apply for continued employment. The Demon's Head is invited to attend a formal transition meeting at the Gotham Continental, where terms of his retirement will be discussed with all due respect to his considerable legacy. This is not a negotiation. Ra's al Ghul read the letter once, till he set it down on the desk. He folded his hands and stared at the wall for exactly 45 seconds, which was, for a man of his temperament, an extraordinary exercise in restraint. Then he picked up the letter, walked to the fireplace, and burned it. "Prepare the council," he said to the shadows. The shadows moved because the shadows in Ra's al Ghul's home were always listening. The high table was not a new institution. Raz knew its history better than most of its current members knew it themselves. It had emerged from the wreckage of medieval European crime guilds, codified its laws through the Renaissance, expanded through empire and colonialism, and arrived at the modern era as the closest thing the underworld had to international law. Its continental hotels served as neutral ground, sanctuaries where no blood could be spilled, and where assassins and warlords sat across from one another under the fiction of civilization. Its adjudicators dispensed justice that was swift and merciless and entirely without appeal. It was, Ra's had always thought, a system built by people who confused bureaucracy with power. He had never joined it. He had never needed to. The League of Assassins predated the High Table by 6 centuries, and Ra's al Ghul did not recognize authorities that had not existed when he was born. He had maintained a careful, mutually respectful distance, acknowledging the table's domain in Europe, Asia, and the Americas, without conceding that its authority extended to his own territory. It was the arrangement of parallel empires, and it had held because the table, for all its arrogance, was not foolish enough to provoke a man who commanded a global army of fanatically loyal killers and had, on 3 separate documented occasions, died and come back. When that arrangement had apparently expired, the Gotham Continental had opened 6 weeks ago in the old Zionist building on the edge of the Diamond District, a 9-story tower of black marble and reinforced steel that had appeared almost overnight, its staff arriving in unmarked vehicles. its guests checking in with the quiet purposefulness of people accustomed to existing in the space between the world's laws. Winston Scott's operation in New York was legendary. The Gotham branch was newer. Its manager, a precise French woman named Colette, who had, within her first week of operation, established relationships with four of Gotham's major crime families, two corrupt GCPD divisions, and the mayor's chief of staff. She was very good. Roz respected competence even in his enemies, but the letter had moved the situation beyond respect. The transition meeting the table had so generously offered was, Roz recognized, an execution dressed in formal wear. Attend. Anna and Di surrounded by their people on their neutral ground. Decline and be marked as a defector. Either outcome served the table's purposes. It was, he had to admit, elegantly constructed. He simply had no intention of attending either version of the scenario they had planned. In the Batcave, 48 hours later, Bruce Wayne stood before a screen populated with photographs, financial records, and the biometric scans Alfred had quietly compiled from the Gotham Continental's public-facing security feeds. He had been watching the building since it opened. He had noted the kinds of guests that moved through its doors, the quality of their hardware, the precision of their footwork, the way they scanned a room the moment they entered it with a specific calibrated awareness of trained killers. He had flagged it. He had been monitoring it. He had not yet determined what to do about it. The answer came at 3 a.m. in the form of 17 bodies arranged with meticulous geometry across the Continental's loading dock. Each one a high-table operative, each one killed with a single blade strike, each one positioned to spell out, in Arabic script visible only from the roof of the adjacent building, two words: war declared. Bruce stared at the satellite image. He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. "Alfred," he said quietly, "get me everything we have on the League of Assassins' current Gotham infrastructure." "Already pulling it, sir," Alfred replied from somewhere behind him, "though I suspect, given the artistic flair of this particular message, that whatever infrastructure we have on file may be somewhat out of date." "It will be." Bruce pulled on the cowl. "It always is with him. If you want to see more characters and factions collide across different universes," and he hit that subscribe button and dropped the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. "Hope shines brightest in the darkest night." The envoy arrived at Ra's al Ghul's Tricorner safe house at noon the following day. There were 6 of them, which Ra's noted with mild contempt. 6 was a number chosen for intimidation. Enough bodies to communicate serious intent. Few enough to move through Gotham without attracting the kind of attention that brought Batman to doorsteps. They were dressed in the understated way that serious money always dressed when it wanted to appear casual, and they moved with the coordinated awareness of people who had spent years operating in environments where a single misread gesture ended careers permanently. Their leader was a man Raz had encountered once before, in Prague in 1987. He had been younger then, obviously, and working as a mid-level enforcer for a table-affiliated operation in Eastern Europe. He was called Graves. He had cold gray eyes and the particular stillness of a man who had made peace with violence so thoroughly that it no longer registered as a separate category of experience. Raz received them in the Brownstones' main sitting room, alone, seated in a high-backed chair with a cup of tea cooling on the table beside him. He was dressed simply. He looked, to anyone who didn't know better, like a distinguished man in his early 60s enjoying a quiet afternoon. Graves entered first. His eyes moved through the room with professional thoroughness, cataloging exits, sightlines, potential threats. He found nothing. This, Raz knew, should have concerned him more than it did. "The table appreciates your willingness to meet," Graves said. "I did not agree to meet," Raz replied pleasantly. "You arrived. There is a distinction." Graves absorbed this without visible reaction. "Yeah, the message on the Continental's dock was noted. The table considers it a regrettable escalation. The table sent me a letter informing me that my life's work was to be absorbed at their discretion." Raz lifted his tea, considered it, set it back down. "I considered that the regrettable escalation. The dock was my response. Those were table personnel. They were competently trained, reasonably disciplined." He paused. Insufficient. The temperature in the room dropped by no measurable degree, and every perceptible one. Graves studied the old man across from him with the careful reassessment of someone recalibrating a threat profile in real time. The table's offer stands, Graves said. Transition meeting, terms of retirement, your legacy acknowledged, your remaining personnel absorbed into table structure at appropriate ranks. This is a generous arrangement, given the circumstances. The circumstances, Roz said, are that the high table has made the catastrophic error of believing that Gotham is available for acquisition. He stood slowly with the unhurried ease of a man who has never once in his life needed a rush. Gotham is not available. It has never been available. It belongs to a shadow that predates your institution by 6 centuries. And the fact that your table's historians apparently failed to communicate this reality to whoever drafted that letter suggests a failure of intelligence that your organization cannot afford. Graves was quiet for a moment. You're one man. I have been one man for a very long time, Roz said. I find it suits me. What happened next took 11 seconds. Ra's al Ghul did not raise his voice. He did not signal, gesture, or visibly communicate with anyone. And the 6 high-table operatives simply found themselves, between one breath and the next, on their knees. Each one controlled by a League assassin who had materialized from the walls, the ceiling, the shadows behind the furniture, with the absolute silence of people for whom invisibility was not a skill, but a philosophy. Each operative had a blade at their throat. Each blade was perfectly still. Graves alone remained standing. And only because Roz had moved to stand directly in front of him, with a speed that a man of his apparent age should not have possessed, close enough that Graves could see the absolute ancient calm in his eyes. The specific quality of stillness that belongs only to people who have watched centuries turn and found nothing in the passage of time that particularly frightened them. You will return to the Continental, Roz said quietly. You will relay this message to Colette, who will relay it to whoever sits above her, who will relay it to the table itself. The message is this. Gotham is League territory. It has always been League territory. Any table operation within these city limits will be dismantled. Any personnel who remain after 72 hours will not be found. In the transition meeting, he smiled, and it was the smile of a man who has buried empires, will not be taking place. He stepped back. The League assassins withdrew like smoke. The 6 operatives found themselves on their feet again. Weapons gone, dignity comprehensively destroyed. Graves straightened his jacket with the mechanical precision of a man buying time to reorient. His cold gray eyes held something they hadn't held when he walked in. Not quite fear, the thing that exists just before fear crystallizes. The recognition of a depth you hadn't known was there until you were already standing at its edge. The table will respond, he said. Oh no, I am counting on it, Roz replied. They left without another word. Roz listened to the sound of their vehicles pulling away from the curb, then turned to the senior assassin who had materialized silently at his shoulder. A woman named Nissa, adjacent in her bearing, though she was not his daughter, trained in the Nanda Parbat compound over a decade of absolute devotion to the League's purpose. Track them back to the Continental, he said. I want to know the moment the table's response leaves whatever channel they use to transmit it. And Batman? She asked. Roz was quiet for a moment. The question deserved the pause it received. Bruce Wayne was the single variable in this equation that the high table had not accounted for, and that Roz himself could not fully predict. His detective, his greatest student, his most persistent failure, and most genuine source of pride, in the way that only deeply complicated relationships produce. Batman, Roz said, will come when the bodies demand it. He always does. He moved to the window and looked out over Gotham's gray afternoon skyline, the cathedral spires and the rusted water towers, and the distant gleam of the rebuilt commercial district, layered over the eternal shadow of a city that ate its heroes and archived its monsters. Let him come, he said. What I require from Bruce Wayne is not his permission. It is his understanding. He turned from the window. Case begin the second phase. The second phase announced itself at 2:47 a.m. across 6 simultaneous locations. A high-table money laundering operation running through a Burnley district dry cleaning chain went dark in the space of 4 minutes. Power cut, personnel neutralized, ledgers removed with a kind of thoroughness that suggested the people who took them knew exactly what they were looking for and exactly where it was kept. In the Diamond District, a table-affiliated arms broker named Petrov, who had been quietly supplying Gotham's mid-tier crime families with European hardware for 3 months, was found seated at his kitchen table, alive, unharmed, and in possession of a single folded note that caused him to book a one-way flight to Lisbon before sunrise. A Continental courier moving between the hotel and a safe house in the Narrows was intercepted, relieved of his package, and returned to the Continental's front steps with a bow tied around his wrist from his own shoelaces. The other 3 locations were less gentle. Batman stood in the center of what had been a high-table logistics hub, operating beneath a tri-corner district import warehouse, and cataloged the details with the systematic attention that crime scenes demanded, and that his particular psychology had long since converted from discipline into instinct. 17 men. None dead. Each one incapacitated with a precision that spoke to formal martial training. Pressure points, joint locks, strikes calibrated to disable rather than destroy. The weapons had been removed, but the men had been left breathing, which was either mercy or message, depending on how you read the signature. He read it as both. League of Assassins, he said, not because Alfred needed confirmation, but because saying it aloud helped organize the shape of what he was looking at. So consistent with their methodology, Alfred agreed through the comm. Though I note the restraint is somewhat uncharacteristic for a full League operation. Araz appears to be making a point, rather than simply clearing the board. He's showing the table what controlled looks like before he shows them what uncontrolled looks like. Batman crouched beside one of the unconscious men, examined the specific angle of the strike that had dropped him. Clean, economical. The kind of technique that took a decade to develop and looked effortless once you had it. He wants them to understand the difference between what he's willing to do and what he's capable of. A psychological escalation before the physical one. He's done it before. Bruce stood, turned slowly in the center of the room, while building the architecture of Ra's strategy from the evidence around him, the way he had learned to build everything, from the specific details outward toward the general truth, never the reverse. He's mapping the table's entire Gotham infrastructure and dismantling it piece by piece in a single night. By morning, the table will have lost 40% of their local operation, and they won't be able to identify how he knew where to find all of it. How did he know where to find all of it? Because Ra's has been watching Gotham for 150 years and the table has been here for 6 weeks. He moved toward the exit. They walked into his city and assumed their intelligence was current. It wasn't. It was never going to be. The Batmobile met him 2 blocks north. He sat behind the controls for a moment without moving, running the geometry of the situation through the part of his mind that handled threat assessment. The cold actuarial part that stripped sentiment away and looked at consequences with the dispassion of someone calculating odds rather than making moral judgments. The high table would respond. That was not a question. Organizations built on absolute authority and the enforcement of ironclad codes did not absorb this kind of provocation and recalibrate quietly. They responded with overwhelming, demonstrative force because their entire institutional power rested on the credibility of their response to defiance. Every Continental manager, every affiliated assassin, every crime lord who paid table tribute was watching how this played out. If the table allowed Ra's al Ghul to declare war and dismantle their Gotham operation without consequences that were visible and terminal, they lost something they could not replace, which meant they would send people, serious people, the kind of people who turned Gotham's complicated Byzantine criminal ecosystem into something considerably simpler and considerably more dangerous. In Gotham's civilians would be caught between 2 forces that had absolutely no interest in minimizing collateral damage beyond what their respective codes demanded. And Ra's al Ghul's code, Batman knew from long and painful experience, defined acceptable collateral damage in ways that Bruce Wayne found morally intolerable. He pulled up the Continental's file on the back computer. 6 weeks of surveillance data, architectural scans of the Sionis building, financial threads connecting the hotel's shell companies to table-affiliated operations across the eastern seaboard. He had been building the file since the hotel opened, waiting to determine whether the table's presence in Gotham was operational or merely logistical. He had his answer now. The question was what he did with it. He could move against the Continental directly, expose the hotel's criminal connections, bring GCPD pressure, or work through Harvey Bullock and the handful of genuinely uncorrupted officers he trusted to make the building untenable as a base of operations. This would slow the table's response, complicate their logistics, buy time. Roz would use that time to press his advantage further. The breathing room Batman created for the city would be occupied by the League. He could move against Roz, interrupt the League's operations, protect the table's remaining Gotham infrastructure, or effectively take the high table's side in a war between two organizations that both deserved exactly the opposition he was capable of bringing to bear. This option had the distinct disadvantage of being insane, or he could do what Bruce Wayne had been doing with Ra's al Ghul for the better part of his adult life, navigate the terrible, intimate complexity of opposing a man he understood too well, whose methods he found unconscionable, and whose diagnosis of the world's disease he found, and in the deepest and most carefully guarded part of himself, not entirely wrong. The comm crackled. "Master Bruce," Alfred said, with a particular inflection that meant incoming information of significance. "I've just picked up a GCPD dispatch. Multiple casualties reported in the Bowery. Initial descriptions suggest assassins," Bruce said. "Of the professional variety, yes, though not League." A pause. The witnesses who were coherent enough to give descriptions mentioned tactical gear. It's European accents, automatic weapons. Batman's hands were already moving across the controls. "The table's response," he said, "was faster than I expected. Ra's al Ghul has a gift for accelerating other people's timelines," Alfred observed. "It's one of his more exhausting qualities." The Batmobile moved into Gotham's dark arteries like a shadow given purpose, and above the city, in a dozen windows and 100 shadows, so two armies that had been circling each other for 6 weeks finally stopped circling. The adjudicator came to Gotham on a Thursday. She arrived at Gotham Central Station on the 6 a.m., train from New York, carrying a single black case and accompanied by two people whose function was obviously not luggage assistance. She was a small woman, immaculately dressed in charcoal gray, when with the quality of absolute stillness that belonged to people who had spent careers in rooms where the wrong word ended lives. Her name, as far as Batman's contacts could determine, was never used. She was referred to in the fragments of table communication Alfred had managed to intercept, simply as the adjudicator. The title sufficient, the person beneath it irrelevant to her function. Her function was judgment. Batman had read everything available on the high table's adjudication system in the 72 hours since the Bowery incident. The Bowery had been a statement. 8 League operatives engaged by a table response team in a running battle through 4 city blocks that left 11 people dead. 6 of them civilians who had been in the wrong Gotham street at the wrong Gotham hour, which was the only kind of hour Gotham reliably produced. GCPD had arrived to find a scene they couldn't explain and wouldn't be able to explain, and Commissioner Bullock had called Bruce Wayne's private line at 4 a.m. with the specific exhaustion of a man who had spent too many years watching his city absorb impossible things. "Tell me this isn't Ra's," Bullock had said. "It's complicated," Bruce had replied. "It's always complicated with you people." A pause filled with the sound of a man lighting a cigarette. 11 dead, Wayne. 6 of them nobody. These people coming home from work, walking a dog, sitting in a car. You understand what I'm telling you?" He understood. He had been understanding it since the Bowery, turning it over in his mind with the relentless attention he gave to things that demanded solution and resisted it. The civilian casualties that were inevitable the moment two forces of this caliber decided Gotham was their battlefield. The acceleration of that inevitability with every hour the war continued, in the narrowing window in which intervention could still mean something. The adjudicator's arrival meant the window was narrowing faster than he'd calculated. She established herself in the Continental's top-floor suite within 2 hours of arriving, and within 4 hours she had issued 3 decrees that Alfred intercepted through channels Batman preferred not to examine too closely. In the first decree suspended all standard table operations in Gotham pending resolution of the conflict with the League of Assassins. The second decree formally designated Ras al Ghul as excommunicado, stripped of any table protections or courtesies that had previously existed as a matter of professional respect between parallel organizations. The third decree authorized an open contract, $40 million, marker redeemable, available to any table-affiliated assassin in good standing. The target was Ras al Ghul, the demon's head, leader of the League of Assassins, currently operating within Gotham City limits. Batman stared at the decoded intercept on the Bat computer screen for a long moment. $40 million was not a number chosen arbitrarily. It was a number chosen to ensure that every serious assassin affiliated with the High Table, and there were, by his best estimate, several hundred operating within practical striking distance of Gotham, would find the risk calculation irresistible. It was a number designed to flood the city with professional killers, to overwhelm the League's ability to maintain defensive perimeters through sheer volume of attempts. It was also a number that would turn Gotham into something beyond a battlefield. It would turn it into a hunting ground. He was already moving when Alfred spoke. "There's something else," Alfred said carefully. "A secondary communication, encrypted differently from the others. It appears to be addressed, and I want to be precise here, sir, because the implications are considerable. To you." Batman stopped. "To Batman specifically," Alfred continued. "The table appears to be aware of your involvement in monitoring the situation. The message is brief. It states that the High Table respects Batman's jurisdiction over Gotham's civilian population and has no interest in conflict with Gotham's protector. It further states that should Batman choose to remain neutral in the conflict between the Table and the League of Assassins, the Table will undertake reasonable efforts to minimize civilian casualties and will withdraw from Gotham entirely once the Ra's al Ghul matter is resolved." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man examining a trap from multiple angles simultaneously. "They're asking me to stand aside," Batman said. "They're asking you to stand aside in exchange for a promise made by an organization whose entire institutional identity rests on the absolute enforcement of its own code," Alfred agreed, "which is either a genuine offer from people who understand that fighting Batman while fighting Ra's al Ghul is logistically inadvisable, or it's a way to neutralize me while they flood the city with assassins chasing a $40 million contract." He moved to the vehicle bay. "Either way, they've told me something important. That they're afraid of you. That they've done their research." He pulled on the gauntlets. "They know I won't work with Ra's. They know I find the League's methods unacceptable. They're trying to use my principles against me. Offer me the outcome I want, Gotham protected, the League removed, in exchange for my non-interference." He paused. "It's actually quite elegant. High praise from you, sir. Don't tell them that." He swung into the vehicle. "The problem with the offer isn't the offer. It's that the Table's definition of minimizing civilian casualties and mine are going to be different enough to matter. And once that contract is active, $40 million worth of assassins converging on one target in a city of 12 million people." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The Batmobile moved through the cave tunnel toward Gotham's surface, walked toward the gray morning and the war that was accelerating beyond any single variable's ability to contain it. Somewhere in the city, Ra's al Ghul was 3 moves ahead of everyone and satisfied about it. Somewhere in the Continental's top floor, the adjudicator was making decisions in the cold administrative language of institutional power. And in the Bowery and the Narrows and the Diamond District, in the spaces between the chess pieces, 112 million people were living their lives with the specific Gotham resilience of people accustomed to the ground shifting beneath them. Batman thought about the 6 people who had died in the Bowery walking home, walking dogs, sitting in cars. He thought about Ra's al Ghul's smile when he said, "Let him come." He thought about what neutrality actually meant when you had the power to act and chose not to. Then he stopped thinking about it and drove toward the Continental. Because the adjudicator had been in Gotham for 6 hours, and he needed to look her in the eye before she made any more decisions about his city. The Continental's lobby was exactly what Batman had expected, and precisely what he found most dangerous about the High Table's operation. It was civilized. That was the word that kept returning as he moved through the entrance. Not through the front door, which would have been an announcement. But through a service corridor that the table's security team had swept 3 times and still not identified as a viable entry point because they were thinking like hoteliers rather than like someone who had spent 20 years learning every hidden artery in Gotham's architectural body. The lobby was warm marble and soft lighting, and the kind of quiet that expensive places cultivated deliberately, with the hush of an environment where serious people conducted serious business without raising their voices. Staff moved with the polished efficiency of people trained to see everything and react to nothing visibly. 3 men near the concierge desk were not staff. Their suits were correct and their posture was professionally relaxed, and their eyes were doing the specific, constant work of people paid to ensure that nothing surprising survived long enough to become a problem. A Batman had been in the lobby for 40 seconds before any of them registered his presence, which told him their perimeter was better than average and not good enough. The reaction, when it came, was admirably controlled. No reaching for weapons, no shouting. The 3 men simply repositioned with the coordinated smoothness of a practiced formation, creating a triangle around the space he occupied, when in the one nearest the elevator bank pressed something on his wrist that would be alerting the adjudicator's floor right now. "I have an appointment," Batman said. "You don't," said the nearest man. "She'll want to see me anyway." A pause. The man's eyes held the particular calculation of someone weighing institutional protocol against practical reality. The reality being that Batman was standing in the Continental's lobby and had not been stopped at any of the 3 security layers that were supposed to prevent exactly this, which meant that either the security layers had failed or Batman had chosen to let them work and had entered anyway, and neither option was comfortable. "Yes, the Continental is neutral ground," the man said carefully. "No blood spilled on these premises." "I'm aware of your rules," Batman replied. "I'm not here to break them. I'm here to talk." The elevator opened. Colette emerged, the Continental's manager, precise and unruffled in the way of someone whose professional environment regularly contained apex predators and had learned to treat this as an atmospheric condition rather than an emergency. She looked at Batman with the careful assessment of a woman who had spent a career making rapid, accurate judgments about the people who walked through her doors. "The Dark Knight," she said. "We wondered when you'd come. I'd like to speak with the adjudicator." "The adjudicator doesn't receive unscheduled visitors. Tell her Ra's al Ghul has Lazarus Pits positioned within 3 miles of this building," Batman said. "Tell her the League has been in Gotham for 150 years, and they know where every water main, every power junction, every structural support runs beneath every building in a 12-block radius of the Continental. Tell her I have information about what Ra's is planning for the next 48 hours that she doesn't have and can't get through her own channels." He held Colette's gaze. "And then tell me if she still doesn't receive unscheduled visitors." Colette studied him for 3 seconds, genuinely studied him, not performing consideration, then turned and walked back to the elevator without a word. The doors closed. Batman waited in the lobby's expensive hush with the table's 3 security men, maintaining their triangle around him. And somewhere above his head, the adjudicator was receiving a message and making a decision. The elevator returned in 4 minutes. The adjudicator's suite occupied the entire 9th floor. She was standing at the window when Batman entered, looking out over Gotham's mid-morning skyline with the expression of someone taking inventory of a property dispute rather than witnessing a city. Up close, she was older than she'd appeared at the station, late 60s perhaps, in with white hair pulled back severely and hands that were folded behind her back, with the practiced stillness of someone who had learned long ago that visible tension was a form of information she preferred not to give away. She did not turn when he entered. "Batman," she said, "the table is aware of your history with Ra's al Ghul. We considered it when drafting our communication to you." "I know," he said. "You thought my opposition to the League would make me a useful neutral party. Why, possibly even an asset. We thought your interest in protecting Gotham's civilian population aligned with the table's interest in resolving this conflict efficiently." She turned then, and her eyes were the flat, pewter gray of institutional authority. Not cruel, not warm, simply categorical. "Ra's al Ghul has declared war on the High Table. The High Table will respond with the full weight of its enforcement apparatus. This is not a negotiable outcome. It is a procedural certainty. 6 civilians died in the Bowery 2 nights ago. A regrettable consequence of League aggression. The League didn't bring automatic weapons into a populated neighborhood, Batman said. Your response team did. The adjudicator was quiet for a moment. Operational parameters in a contested urban environment are going to kill more people, Batman said. The contract you've issued will bring dozens of assassins into this city chasing $40 million. Reyes has spent 150 years preparing Gotham as a defensive position. Your people are going to be moving through streets they don't know against an enemy who has contingencies for every approach and every mistake they make, every miscalculation, every piece of crossfire. He let the sentence complete itself in the silence between them. The adjudicator studied him with the pewter eyes. You said you had information about Ra's al Ghul's plans. I said I had information. And I didn't say I was giving it to you. A pause, something shifted almost imperceptibly in the flat gray eyes. Not quite surprised, but its more dignified cousin. Then what are you offering? I'm not offering anything yet, Batman said. I'm here to understand what the table actually wants from this situation. Not the institutional answer, the practical one. He moved to stand beside her at the window, looking out at the same skyline from the same angle. 12 million lives arranged beneath them in the indifferent geometry of a city that kept moving regardless of what its shadows decided. You can't actually kill Ra's al Ghul permanently. I know that. Your researchers know that. Somewhere in your institution's files is a notation about Lazarus Pits and what they mean for conventional termination. So what does resolution actually look like for the high table? The adjudicator was quiet for a long time. Outside, Gotham moved through its morning with the battered, irrepressible momentum of a city that had survived everything it had ever encountered and expected to survive this too. And Batman stood at the window of a criminal institution's Gotham headquarters and waited for an honest answer from a woman whose entire profession was the architecture of dishonesty. Because sometimes the only way to protect 12 million people was to have conversations that had no good options and find the least terrible one before the clock ran out. The adjudicator's honest answer took the form of a silence that lasted precisely long enough to confirm that she had one. The table wants the precedent, she said finally, still looking at the window, at Gotham's skyline arranged before them like a problem requiring administrative solution. Ra's al Ghul's defiance is not, in itself, the crisis. The crisis is what his defiance represents to every other organization watching how the table responds. There are 14 territorial arrangements across North America alone that are held in place by the credibility of our enforcement. If Ra's al Ghul declares war on the high table and survives that declaration, if he retains Gotham, retains his operation, retains the capacity to continue, then 14 arrangements begin to look negotiable. And negotiations are not something the table can afford. So this is institutional vanity dressed as enforcement, Batman said. This is institutional survival, she corrected without heat. The table's authority is not enforced by the morality of its positions. It is enforced by the absolute certainty of its responses. Remove the certainty and you remove the authority. Remove the authority, she paused. The alternative to the table's order is not freedom. It is the kind of chaos that makes Gotham's current situation look contained. Batman considered this with the part of his mind that processed arguments he found uncomfortable, because they contained the kind of truth that didn't become false simply because its source was unacceptable. Ra's al Ghul had made similar arguments about order, about the necessity of absolute authority as an alternative to entropy, about the costs of the kind of civilization that required someone willing to enforce its deepest rules without flinching. He had rejected Ra's version of that argument for 20 years. He was not prepared to accept the table's version of it now, simply because it arrived with better tailoring. The contract, he said. Pull it. The adjudicator turned to look at him directly for the first time since he'd moved to the window. That's not a request I can fulfill. It's the only way this conversation leads anywhere useful. He held her gaze with the specific steadiness he had developed over years of making unreasonable demands in rooms where unreasonable demands were the only currency that mattered. The contract brings assassins into Gotham, Assassins in Gotham means civilian casualties. So civilian casualties mean I stop having conversations and start having a different kind of interaction with every table operative in this city. You've done your research on me. You know what that means operationally. You don't kill. I don't kill, he agreed. But there are things I can do to your Gotham operation that don't require killing, and that will make it functionally impossible for the table to maintain a presence here for the next 3 years. I will dismantle every financial thread, who will expose every shell company, compromise every corrupted official you've recruited, and I will do it in a way that sends the same message to your 14 territorial arrangements that you're trying to send right now. Except the message will be that the high table came to Gotham and left with nothing. The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than the ones before it. This one had weight. You're threatening the high table, Lon, the adjudicator said. Wait, I'm describing consequences, Batman replied. There's a distinction. She studied him for a long moment with the pewter eyes. Then she moved away from the window to a chair, sat with the precise economy of movement of someone conserving energy for extended engagements, and folded her hands on the table in front of her. What are you proposing? Suspend the contract for 72 hours. Give me room to work. I will bring Ra's al Ghul to a point where he is willing to reach an arrangement that satisfies the table's need for a visible resolution without turning Gotham into a killing field. Ra's al Ghul does not reach arrangements. Ra's al Ghul reaches arrangements with me, Batman said. It's the singular and deeply inconvenient feature of our relationship. Another silence. The adjudicator's expression moved through several barely visible gradations of calculation before arriving at something that was not quite decision, but was adjacent to it. 72 hours, she said. The contract is suspended, not withdrawn. If you cannot produce a resolution in that window, it reactivates automatically, and the table proceeds without further consultation with Gotham's protector. Understood. And Batman, she said as he moved toward the door. Ra's al Ghul has made a move in the last 4 hours that you are not yet aware of. I'm telling you this not as a courtesy, but because it affects your timeline, and I need you operating with accurate information. She opened a slim folder on the table, slid a single photograph across the surface without looking at it. He has taken 3 table-affiliated individuals, not operatives, civilians. People with table connections through family or financial arrangements who have no operational role in this conflict. Batman picked up the photograph. 3 faces, a banker, a shipping executive, a woman identified only by her table family connection. Hostages, he said. Insurance, the adjudicator corrected. Ra's al Ghul is ensuring that the table cannot escalate to its maximum response without risking people it has institutional obligations to protect. He is not using them as shields. He is using them as arguments, she paused. It is, I will admit, extraordinarily precise. He has identified exactly the 3 individuals whose safety creates the most complex constraints on our response options. Batman set the photograph down. The picture of Ra's al Ghul that was assembling itself in his mind, the tactical architecture of a man who had been planning this specific conflict for far longer than 6 weeks, was both impressive and deeply alarming in the way that only genuinely brilliant strategies were alarming, because their elegance made them harder to disrupt without causing the damage you were trying to prevent. He needed to find Ra's, not to stop him, not yet. Not until he understood the full shape of what Ra's was building toward. Because Ra's al Ghul did not wage wars for the purpose of winning wars. He waged them for the purpose of the lesson that winning delivered, and the lesson he intended to deliver to the high table was still one section away from being completely legible. He left the Continental through the same service corridor he'd entered, and Gotham's cold morning received him back into its gray embrace. So his comm connected automatically to the Batcave. Alfred, sir, how did the adjudicator take being told to stand down by a man dressed as a bat? Better than expected. He moved through the alley toward where he'd positioned the Batmobile 6 blocks east. I need Ra's al Ghul's location. Current, not projected. I've been running the League's movement patterns against the city's infrastructure data since last night, Alfred said. There's a convergence point in the old Gotham Waterworks facility beneath the East End. Significant foot traffic in and out through the maintenance tunnels over the past 18 hours. He's been there the whole time, Batman said quietly, right beneath us. Waiting for you to come to him, I'd imagine. Alfred said, as he always does. Batman thought about Ra's al Ghul sitting in the dark beneath Gotham's streets, patient and ancient, and several steps ahead of everyone above him. And he thought about the three hostages and the adjudicator's 72 hours and the $40 million contract suspended like a blade above the city's throat. Then he descended. The Gotham Waterworks facility had been decommissioned in 1987 and forgotten in the particular way that Gotham forgot things, not through demolition or repurposing, but through bureaucratic abandonment. Its existence persisting in municipal records that nobody consulted and in the memory of the city's infrastructure, like a word remembered only when you stop trying to remember it. Ra's al Ghul had found it, naturally, within a week of its abandonment. Batman descended through a maintenance shaft that deposited him into a vast underground chamber, where Victorian-era pipework met mid-century concrete in the architectural palimpsest that characterized everything built beneath Gotham's surface. Emergency lighting had been installed recently, clean, modern, running off a power source that was not connected to the city grid. The air smelled of stone and water and the faint chemical edge of something that made the back of Batman's throat register a distant familiar warning. Lazarus Compound. Trace amounts. Enough to confirm what the location already suggested. Ra's was not merely using this facility as a command post. He had been preparing it. On the scale of what Batman walked through over the next 300 meters, recalibrated his understanding of the situation's timeline considerably. This was not 6 weeks of preparation. The infrastructure around him, the League personnel moving through adjacent corridors with the purposeful efficiency of people executing a plan in its advanced stages, the weapons caches positioned at intervals that spoke to detailed knowledge of Gotham's underground geography, the communication array that Alfred was going to have extremely interesting things to say about when Batman got close enough for a scan, represented years of quiet, patient construction. Ra's had been building this the entire time. The thought arrived with the specific quality of revelation that Batman distrusted in himself. The moment when evidence reorganized into a pattern so clean, it felt like it had been arranged for him to find. He slowed his approach, re-examined the details around him through a more skeptical lens, and arrived at the conclusion that yes, Ra's had built this over years, and yes, Ra's knew Batman would come here tonight, and yes, the path from the maintenance shaft to wherever Ra's was sitting had been made precisely navigable enough that Batman's arrival was not infiltration, but invitation. He stopped walking. "You could simply come in," Ra's said from the chamber ahead. "The theatrics of your approach are appreciated, but unnecessary at this point in our relationship." Batman moved into the chamber. It was large, cathedral proportioned in the way of Victorian civic engineering, built by people who believed that even infrastructure deserved grandeur. Ra's sat at a table in its center, beneath the emergency lighting, with a map of Gotham spread before him and 3 people seated along the chamber's far wall, in chairs that were not restraint, but were not quite freedom either. The banker, the shipping executive, the woman with the Table family connection. All 3 were alive, unharmed, and wearing the specific expression of people who had been treated with impeccable courtesy by their captors, and found this more unsettling than rough treatment would have been. Ra's looked up from the map with the unhurried attention of a man interrupted at leisure, rather than command. "Detective," he said, "you spoke with the adjudicator. You knew I would. I knew you would before I took those 3. He gestured toward the wall with a slight inclination of his head. "Their presence was partially for the table's benefit and partially to ensure you had sufficient motivation to engage the table directly rather than spending your first 48 hours attempting to neutralize my operation." He studied Batman with the dark, ageless eyes that had been cataloging Bruce Wayne's decisions for decades. 72 hours. That was the arrangement?" Batman said nothing. "She gave you less than I expected," Ra's said. "She is more confident in the contract's effectiveness than she should be." He stood, moved around the table to look at the map from a different angle. "Sit down, Bruce." "I'll stand." "You'll stand," Ra's acknowledged without visible frustration. "Then stand and listen. Because what I'm about to tell you changes the shape of what you think you're managing." He traced a line on the map with one finger. "A route through Gotham's underground that connected the Waterworks facility to three other points Batman recognized as significant infrastructure junctions. The High Table has been in Gotham for 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, they have compromised 4 city council members, 2 federal judges, the deputy commissioner of police, and 17 senior officials across various municipal departments. Not corrupted, compromised. There is a distinction. Blackmail, Batman said. Comprehensive, architecturally sophisticated blackmail. Roz looked up from the map. The table does not merely want Gotham's criminal infrastructure. They want Gotham's civic infrastructure. The courts, the police, the political apparatus. They want the city itself, not as a base of operations, but as a model. A demonstration that the table can own not merely the shadows of a major American city, but its institutions, its legitimate face. Batman processed this against everything he'd gathered in the past 72 hours and felt the map of the situation shift beneath him with the vertiginous quality of ground that had seemed solid, revealing a different depth. "You have proof," he said. "I have everything," Roz replied. "Every transaction, every threat, every communication. Whilst the League's intelligence operation in Gotham has been running longer than the table has existed as an institution. When they walked into my city, I had a complete picture of their operation within 72 hours. He paused. "I did not declare war because they threatened my criminal infrastructure, Bruce. Criminal infrastructure is replaceable. I declared war because the High Table intends to turn Gotham into something that cannot be undone. And the window in which that can be prevented is closing." The silence between them had the quality of all the silences they had ever shared. Dense with the weight of the argument, neither of them could fully win against the other. The push and pull of two people who agreed on the destination and found each other's roots unconscionable. "You took hostages," Batman said. "When I protected 3 people from being used as leverage against me in ways that would have required me to make choices I preferred to avoid," Roz said. "They have been treated well. They will be returned the moment the table's contract is suspended and the institutional pressure they represent is neutralized. The contract is suspended. 72 hours. Roz raised an eyebrow. Genuine, fractional surprise. "You work quickly. I need the 3 of them released, now. Tonight. When I have your word that you will use the evidence I provide to dismantle the table's institutional hold on Gotham's civic infrastructure," Roz said. "Not later. Not when you've verified it through your own channels. Now. Tonight. With the understanding that some of what I give you was obtained through methods your particular moral framework finds objectionable." Batman looked at the 3 people along the wall. The banker was staring at his hands. The shipping executive was looking at the ceiling. The woman was looking directly at Batman with an expression that had moved past fear into the specific, exhausted territory of someone waiting to find out which version of this situation they were going to survive. "Give me the evidence," Batman said. "Release them, and then tell me what you're planning for the Elder. Because I know you're not finished, and whatever you're building toward in the next 48 hours is the part of this I haven't figured out yet." Ra's al Ghul looked at Bruce Wayne across the map of Gotham with the expression he reserved for the moments he found most genuinely satisfying. The expression of a man who had lived long enough to appreciate the particular quality of an opponent who kept pace. "Sit down, Bruce," he said again. This time, Batman sat. The Elder lived above geography. This was not metaphor in the way that Gotham's monsters were not metaphor. It was operational fact, the kind that Batman had spent 3 hours verifying through sources he trusted and sources he didn't, and the triangulated space between them where truth tended to live when it didn't want to be found. The Elder was the single authority that sat above the High Table in the way that the sky sat above architecture. Not part of the structure, but the condition that made the structure's existence meaningful. The table adjudicated. The table enforced. But the Elder, in the rare moments when the Elder engaged at all, decided things that the table's code could not resolve. Existential questions about the nature of authority itself, one about what the underworld's oldest institution owed to its oldest arrangements. Ra's al Ghul had requested an audience. Batman had spent the 40 minutes between leaving the Waterworks facility and arriving at the coordinates Ra's had provided, working through every version of what that meant and finding none of them comfortable. Ra's did not request audiences. Roz issued communications, made demands, occasionally condescended to negotiation when the tactical geometry left him no better option. The act of requesting, the grammatical submission of it, the acknowledgement of an authority above his own, was so fundamentally contrary to Ra's al Ghul's institutional identity that its occurrence could only mean one of two things. Either Raz genuinely believed the elder represented a power worth addressing directly, or the audience was not a request but a trap dressed in the vocabulary of deference. One Batman arrived at the location, a private airfield 40 minutes outside Gotham that officially belonged to a European logistics company that officially did not exist. To find Raz al Ghul already there, standing at the edge of the tarmac in the cold pre-dawn dark with 4 League operatives arranged behind him at a distance that communicated readiness without aggression. A single aircraft sat on the runway, small, unmarked, on engines already running with the patient hum of a vehicle kept perpetually ready. Raz turned at Batman's approach with no visible surprise. "You followed me," he said. "I was there when you made the call," Batman replied. "The Waterworks facility's communication array was less secure than you believed." A pause. "Ah, see, interesting." Raz filed this away with the equanimity of a man who factored the possibility of his own intelligence failures into his planning at a level granular enough to absorb them without structural damage. "Then you know where we're going." "Morocco, the Elder's current location." Batman stopped 10 feet away. "You're not going alone." "I had not planned to invite you." "I'm not waiting for an invitation." Batman held Raz's gaze in the cold dark. "You told me the table intends to use Gotham as a model. Civic infrastructure, institutional compromise, a demonstration that they can own a city's legitimate face. You gave me evidence that supports that. You asked me to use it." He paused. "I need to know what you're offering the Elder before I commit to any part of this arrangement. Because if your solution to the table's institutional ambition is to replace it with the League's institutional ambition, then we have a fundamental disagreement that supersedes everything else." Raz studied him for a long moment with the ancient, evaluating eyes. "What I am offering the Elder," he said carefully, "is a demonstration that the High Table has violated its own foundational code. The table's authority rests on the integrity of its rules. Neutral ground, no civilian targeting, jurisdictional respect for established territorial arrangements. The table has violated all three in Gotham." He paused. "The Elder has the authority to censure the table, to strip the adjudicator's decrees, withdraw the contract, and impose a prohibition on table operations in Gotham that carries the weight of the institution's oldest law. And in exchange for bringing this violation to the Elder's attention," Batman said, "you get Gotham confirmed as League territory under the Elder's sanction." "I get Gotham confirmed as what it has always been," Raz said. Mine. "That's the part where we have the fundamental disagreement." "Yes," Raz agreed. "It is." He turned toward the aircraft. "Nevertheless, you are coming." The flight to Morocco took 4 hours. Batman spent 2 of them reviewing the evidence Raz had provided on a secured tablet, and it was worse than Raz had described. Not in volume, but in precision. The table's operation in Gotham had not been 6 weeks of opportunistic expansion. It had been 18 months of careful, layered preparation, each compromised official a load-bearing element in a structure designed to make the table's presence in the city irreversible once it reached a certain threshold. 3 more months and the deputy commissioner's cooperation alone would have made it effectively impossible to dislodge them through any legitimate channel. Raz had been right about the window. Batman found this profoundly irritating in the way that being right and Raz al Ghul occupying the same sentence always was. The Elder's location was a compound in the Atlas Mountains, stone and silence, and the quality of age that accumulates in places where serious decisions have been made for long enough that the weight of them becomes architectural. When they were received without ceremony by 2 people whose function was obvious and whose professionalism was of a caliber that Batman registered with the reflexive, objective appreciation of someone who had spent a lifetime assessing competence in dangerous people. The Elder was older than Batman had expected and younger than the authority surrounding the title had implied. A man somewhere beyond 70, seated in a courtyard open to the mountain dark, who looked at Ra's al Ghul and Batman arriving together with an expression that suggested this specific combination was not entirely surprising. He spoke in Arabic. Raz translated without being asked, which was itself a communication. Raz al Ghul performing the function of interpreter as a demonstration of respect that cost him something visible. He asked why the demon's head brings Gotham's protector to this place. Tell him, Batman said, that the demon's head and Gotham's protector agree on the problem and disagree on the solution, and that the Elder's judgment is the only authority either of them is willing to accept as a resolution of that disagreement. Raz translated. The Elder listened. Something moved in the old man's expression, not surprise, but its more weathered cousin, the recognition of a situation that contained genuine novelty after a very long time. He spoke again. He says, Raz translated, with a quality in his voice that Batman couldn't immediately classify, that this is the first time in the table's history that someone has come to the Elder not to seek judgment in their favor, but to submit to judgment itself. Batman said nothing. He also says, Raz continued, and now Batman could classify the quality. It was something between restraint and reluctant respect. That Batman's reputation precedes him even here, and that the fact of his presence changes what the Elder is willing to consider. The Elder spoke at length then, and Raz translated in sections, and the night deepened around the mountain courtyard, where an immortal warlord and a man in a cape sat before the oldest authority in the criminal world, and made the argument that Gotham deserved better than both of them were offering it. It was, Batman reflected, not the strangest conversation he had ever had. It was possibly the most important. The Elder's judgment arrived at dawn. It came not as proclamation, but as the specific weighted silence of a man who had spent a night considering something that deserved the full expenditure of a night's consideration, and who emerged from that expenditure with the quality of absolute resolution that belongs only to people whose decisions carry consequences they have learned to live alongside without flinching. When he walked into the courtyard where Raz and Batman had maintained their separate vigils through the mountain dark, Raz still and meditative in the way of someone accustomed to patience measured in centuries, Batman reviewing evidence and contingency frameworks on the secured tablet with the restless, productive energy of someone for whom stillness was a discipline rather than a default. The Elder sat. He looked at both of them with the evaluating calm of a man examining two arguments he found simultaneously compelling and insufficient. He spoke for 11 minutes. Raz translated without interruption, his voice carrying the words with a neutrality that cost him something Batman could see in the precise control of his expression. The micro-compressions around the eyes and jaw of a man receiving information that was not what he had expected and was working to absorb it without visible reaction. The Elder's judgment was this. The High Table had violated its foundational code in Gotham across three distinct categories. The targeting of civilian infrastructure, the blackmail of municipal officials, the compromise of judicial appointments, the corruption of police command, constituted a Category 1 violation of the table's prohibition against the weaponization of civilian institutions. The deployment of response teams in populated areas with automatic weapons, resulting in civilian casualties, constituted a Category 2 violation of the table's rules of engagement in urban environments. The adjudicator's open contract, issued without the Elder's consultation on a target whose territorial arrangement predated the table's formal legal structure, constituted a procedural violation that the Elder found particularly significant. The contract was void, immediately and permanently. The adjudicator's decrees pertaining to Gotham were suspended pending a full review. The High Table's Gotham operation was to cease within 30 days. Batman absorbed this with the controlled relief of a man who had managed his expectations carefully enough that good news still registered as good news rather than simply the absence of catastrophe. Then Raz finished translating, and the Elder spoke again. And Raz was quiet for 3 seconds before he rendered the second part of the judgment into English. And those 3 seconds told Batman everything he needed to know about what was coming. The Elder finds, Raz said, with the specific flatness of a man reading a verdict against himself, that the League of Assassins' declaration of war against the High Table, while provoked by genuine table violations, was itself conducted in breach of several protocols. The taking of civilian hostages, the conduct of military operations in a populated city without adequate civilian protection measures. The Bowery engagement, in which League operatives initiated contact in a residential area, contributing to the conditions that produced civilian casualties. A pause. The Elder further finds that the League of Assassins' claim to Gotham as exclusive territory is, another pause, longer, with something moving beneath the surface of Ra's composure, like tectonic pressure, finding no available release. Not recognized under the table's jurisdictional framework, as the League has never formally registered its territorial claims through the table's treaty process. Batman looked at Ra's. Ra's was looking at the Elder with an expression that was perfectly composed and absolutely furious in the way that fury expresses itself in people with sufficient self-command to ensure it never reaches the surface, but cannot prevent it from being legible to anyone who knows where to look. "He's ruling against both of you," Batman said. "He is ruling," Ra's said carefully, "for a negotiated resolution. The table withdraws. The League de-escalates. Gotham's status is to be determined through a formal treaty process under the Elder's supervision." The fury compressed further. "It is an elegant ruling. It's a just ruling." "Justice," Ra's said. "Justice is a word that comfortable people use to describe outcomes they find tolerable. Or it's what you get when someone with actual authority looks at what both sides did and refuses to reward either of them for it." Batman stood. "The 3 hostages. Already released. I gave the instruction before we boarded the aircraft." Ra's turned from the Elder with the deliberate composure of a man redirecting his energy from the verdict to its implications. "You understand this is not finished." "I know. The table will comply with the Elder's ruling on the surface, institutionally, formally, with all the procedural correctness their code demands, and then in 6 months or 12 months or 5 years, they will return to Gotham through different channels with different methodology and the same objective, because the table does not abandon strategic ambitions. It defers them. I know that too. And the evidence I gave you, the 18 months of institutional compromise, the compromised officials, the blackmailed judges, I'll use it," Batman said. "Every piece of it. Through channels that will hold up. Through processes that don't require me to explain how I obtained it in ways that compromise future cases." He paused. "Some of it I won't be able to use directly. You know that." "I know," Ra's said. "I gave it to you anyway." They stood in the Atlas Mountain dawn, the ancient stone of the Elder's compound, catching the first light with the amber patience of things built to outlast the arguments conducted around them. And Batman looked at Ra's al Ghul. This man he had fought and studied and failed to stop, and failed to save, and continued, despite everything, to regard with a complicated, an unresolvable mixture of opposition and recognition that their decades of collision had produced, and said what needed to be said. "The League is out of Gotham," Batman said. "That's not negotiable, and it's not part of the Elder's ruling. It's mine." Ra's looked at him steadily. "You cannot enforce that." "I've been enforcing it for 20 years, Batman replied. "Every time you've tried to make Gotham into what you think it should be, I've been there. So every time you've decided the city needs the League's particular brand of order, I've been in the way." He held Ra's gaze with the absolute steadiness of a man who had made this argument with his body and his will, and the relentless refusal to stop getting up when Ra's knocked him down. "The table is leaving. You helped make that happen. That matters. But the price of my cooperation in getting this ruling, in using this evidence, when in standing in front of the Elder and arguing that both sides violated something worth protecting, the price is Gotham." Ra's was quiet for a long time. The dawn light moved across the courtyard stones. "You argue," Ra's said finally, "as though Gotham is yours." "Gotham belongs to the people in it," Batman said. "I just make sure the people who want to own it don't." Another silence. The Elder, who had remained in his chair through this exchange with the patient attention of a man who had witnessed more consequential arguments and found them all instructive, spoke one final time. Ra's translated without the pause this time, and something in his voice had changed. Not softened exactly, but shifted into a register that was adjacent to something Batman had heard from Roz perhaps 4 times in 20 years. When in moments of such genuine extremity that the armor cracked slightly and what lived beneath it was briefly visible. The Elder says, Roz translated, that Gotham is fortunate in its protector, and that the demon's head has, in coming here, demonstrated a restraint that the Elder did not expect and that the table would have been incapable of. He paused. He says that this restraint is the evidence that Ra's al Ghul is not what the High Table believed him to be. Batman looked at Ra's. What did they believe you to be? Ra's met his eyes with the ancient, unreadable depth of a man who had been many things across many centuries and had learned to find the question of what he fundamentally was both fascinating and unanswerable. A monster, Raz said simply. The words sat in the mountain dawn between them, and Batman did not offer the comfortable contradiction that the moment seemed to invite, or because Raz al Ghul did not want comfortable contradictions and had never respected the people who offered them, and because the truth was more complicated than either confirmation or denial, and because this was the nature of the territory they had always occupied together. The unresolvable space between what Raz was and what he might have been, between the man Bruce Wayne could have become and the one Raz had spent decades trying to make him into. Come back to Gotham, Batman said. I'll put you in a cell. Raz smiled. The real one, rare and brief as a crack in stone. You'll try. Gotham received them back the way it received everything. Without ceremony, without welcome, with the gray, indifferent continuity of a city that had been processing impossible things since before either of them was born and expected to continue processing them long after both of them were gone. And the flight back had been silent in the particular way of silences between people who have said the things that needed saying and arrived at the place where words become redundant, where the shape of the arrangement between them was clear enough that elaborating it further would only introduce the kind of imprecision that complicated arrangements survive better without. Juarez had looked out the aircraft window at the Atlantic moving beneath them in the pre-dawn dark, and Batman had reviewed the Elder's ruling through its procedural implications, and neither had felt the need to fill the hours with language. They landed at the same private airfield and went separate directions into Gotham's morning. Batman went to work. The evidence Reyes had provided was, in the cold, analytical light of the Batcave, even more comprehensive than the Moroccan courtyard had allowed him to fully appreciate. 18 months of meticulous intelligence, financial transactions, recorded communications, the specific and legally significant details of every approach the table had made to every compromised official, organized with the archival precision of an institution that had been gathering intelligence since before the concept of institutional intelligence had a name. Juarez had not merely documented the table's Gotham operation. He had built a case that a competent prosecutor could take into a federal courtroom and dismantle an 18-month conspiracy with. The challenge was the sourcing. Batman spent 4 hours with Alfred constructing the legal architecture around the evidence, identifying which elements could be introduced through channels that would survive scrutiny, which required parallel construction through legitimate investigative methods, to which needed to be handed to federal contacts through intermediaries, careful enough to obscure the chain of custody without breaking it. It was the work he found least satisfying and most necessary, the translation of truth obtained through methods the law didn't recognize into a form the law could use. The compromise between the world as it was and the world as the courtroom required it to be presented. By noon he had a package. So by 2 o'clock it was moving through 3 separate channels toward the FBI's Organized Crime Division, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, and a federal judge in Gotham whose integrity Batman had verified personally and whose courage under institutional pressure he had watched and found sufficient. At 3:15, the Gotham Continental received a visit from federal agents. Batman watched it from a rooftop 4 blocks away through the lens of a surveillance system that Alfred had positioned the previous evening. Colette emerged from the building with the precise composure of a woman who had prepared for this possibility and found the preparation adequate, accompanied by 2 attorneys whose retainer fees were sufficient to make the initial arrest a procedural inconvenience rather than an existential crisis. And the table's legal infrastructure was formidable, and its response to federal pressure would be protracted and sophisticated and would ultimately, Batman assessed, fail. Because the evidence was too specific, too documented, too architecturally complete to be argued around by even the most capable defense. The adjudicator had left Gotham 8 hours before the federal agents arrived. Batman noted this without surprise. And the table's senior personnel had received the Elder's ruling through their own channels and processed its implications with the institutional efficiency of an organization that had survived for centuries, partly through the discipline of knowing when withdrawal served better than resistance. The contract had died the moment the Elder voided it. And the assassins who had been converging on Gotham, Batman's contacts had identified 17 in transit when the ruling came through. Reversed course with the unanimous, immediate compliance of people for whom the table's code was not a guideline, but a load-bearing structure. $40 million disappeared from the operational calculus in the time it took the Elder's word to reach the people it needed to reach. Commissioner Bullock called at 4 o'clock. "So the feds are in the Continental," he said with the specific tone of a man who has received an answer to a question he hadn't quite known how to ask. "You want to tell me what I'm looking at?" "Organized crime operation using the hotel as a coordination point," Batman said. "The financial documentation the federal team is working from is solid. The cases will hold." A pause. "The deputy commissioner is part of the documentation," Batman said. "I'm sorry, Harvey." Another pause, longer. It with the sound of a man absorbing something he had possibly suspected and found the confirmation no easier for the suspicion. "How many?" 17 municipal officials across various departments, 4 council members, 2 federal judges. He paused. "The full list is with the U.S. Attorney." Bullock was quiet for a long moment. "This is going to be a mess." "Yes, a significant, protracted, city-shaking mess." "Yes, right." The sound of a cigarette. "Monsieur and Ra's al Ghul?" Batman looked out over Gotham from the rooftop, the cathedral spires and the water towers, and the gray afternoon light moving across 12 million lives arranged in the patient, battered, irrepressible density of a city that kept existing regardless of what its shadows decided about it. "Ra's al Ghul is no longer operating in Gotham," Batman said. It was true. It was also the kind of true that had an expiration date, and both of them knew it. And Bullock had spent enough years in Gotham to understand that some truths were valuable precisely in the window of their accuracy, without requiring anyone to say out loud that the window would close. "Right," Bullock said again. "Thanks, Batman." The line went dead. Batman remained on the rooftop as Gotham's afternoon moved toward evening, the light shifting through the particular gradations that the city's skyline produced in the hour before darkness. The amber catch on the cathedral stone, while the blue deepening over the bay, the first lights coming on in the towers of the commercial district like a slow electrical dawn running in reverse. Below him, the city moved through its routines with the specific Gotham resilience of people who had learned to conduct their lives in the space between one crisis and the next, without losing the thread of what those lives were actually for. The 3 hostages had been returned safely. The federal cases would proceed. The Continental would close its Gotham operation within the 30 days the Elder's ruling required. 17 compromised officials would face consequences that were slow and procedural and unsatisfying, in the way that legal consequences always were compared to the immediacy of the damage they were meant to address. But that would hold. That would be real. That would mean something in the accumulated architecture of a city trying to remain something worth protecting. It was not a clean resolution. It never was. Ra's al Ghul had declared war on the High Table and won the thing he'd actually been fighting for. Not territorial confirmation, not institutional victory, but the removal of a threat to Gotham's civic infrastructure that Batman, without Ra's intelligence and Ra's provocation and Ra's willingness to escalate in ways Batman could not, would have taken years to fully map and longer to dismantle. This did not make Ra's al Ghul right. It did not make his methods acceptable or his vision for Gotham anything other than what it had always been. The vision of a man who loved the city the way a collector loved rare things, possessively, with a care that was genuine and a control that was absolute, and an understanding of the difference between love and ownership that remained, after all these centuries, incomplete. But it meant what it always meant when Ra's al Ghul and Bruce Wayne ended up, however briefly, show on the same side of something, that the world was more complicated than either of them wanted it to be, and that this complexity was not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be navigated again and again in the long and specific work of protecting a city that deserved better than it usually got and kept getting up anyway. Where Batman pulled the cape around himself in the evening wind and prepared to descend back into Gotham's streets, back into the work that didn't end because the threats didn't end, back into the gray and amber darkness where the next thing was already forming in the spaces the last thing had vacated. Somewhere across the city, in a safe house that would be empty by morning, Ra's al Ghul was looking at a map of Gotham with the patient, one ancient attention of a man who had been studying this particular problem for 150 years and found it, still, inexhaustibly interesting. And in a server room in Brussels, behind 17 layers of institutional encryption, the High Table's senior counsel was convening an emergency session to discuss the elders' ruling, the federal action in Gotham, and the question of what came next, because the table did not abandon strategic ambitions, it deferred them. Its Batman dropped from the rooftop into Gotham's evening and disappeared into the city that had always belonged to its monsters and its protectors, and the complicated, unresolvable, necessary tension between them. In the end, Gotham remained what it had always been, a city too stubborn to be owned and too complicated to be saved, caught perpetually between the darkness that wanted to possess it and the light that refused to abandon it. And Ra's al Ghul had declared war on the High Table not out of territorial pride alone, but out of the genuine, if self-serving, recognition that some threats required the kind of response that operated beyond Batman's careful moral framework. He had been right about the threat. He had been wrong about his right to resolve it alone. The Elders' ruling had threaded that needle with the wisdom of genuine authority, stripping the table's institutional grip, checking the League's territorial ambition, and leaving Gotham in the imperfect, necessary custody of the man who had always understood that protecting a city meant accepting you could never truly possess it. The compromised officials would face justice slowly. The Continental would close its doors. And somewhere in the spaces between these resolutions, in the shadows that Gotham's light never quite reached, the next thing was already assembling itself with the patient inevitability of a city that had never once, in all its long and battered history, run out of darkness to navigate.